so that this can live in our training bank. So anybody who isn't here today, or anybody that comes on to any of our organizations and our partners, can see this in the future. So without any further ado, Zoe and Katie, you can take it away.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to spend the next couple of hours with you all. This is going to be a training today, primarily focused on transitional shelter and the model being low barrier housing. We're going to talk about harm reduction a bit. We're going to talk about trauma in the brain and trauma-informed care. And then hopefully we're going to have a really just a good discussion throughout. So Zoe and I will introduce ourselves, a little bit about who we are and where we come from, but then we'd also love to hear and know more about who is with us today, and what your role is, and anything that you're really hoping to learn today. We're pretty informal, I'll start by saying. We definitely know that Zoom trainings or Microsoft Teams trainings can be tough. So we appreciate you showing up, and the more interactive we can make this, the better I think it is for everyone. So if you feel free to raise your hand, feel free to write something in the chat. Just let us know if there are questions or comments or things that you would like to discuss further as we go. When one of us is presenting, the other one will be monitoring the chat box, and so we'll be able to see if people chime in with comments. But with that said, we'll do a little bit of introduction. And then again, really want to hear from you all and find out a little bit more about what you are hoping to gain from this. As Richard said, this will be the first of a couple of different trainings that we do and we offer. And we hope to hopefully be able to do some things in person next year. But for right now, we thought we would start with a couple of virtual trainings. So again, my name is Katie Simons. I am a supportive housing consultant and COO of Beau Simone Consulting. Beau Simone is a company that Zoe and I founded back in 2019, but we've each been working in various areas from homeless services and direct services, all the way through, transitional and affordable and permanent supportive housing. So we have over about 50 years of collective experience. That's the two of us plus our team. We have a woman on our team named Bridget Course and another woman named Kathy Harris. We all work with tribes, rural and urban communities. And again, Bridget worked in a DV shelter and ran a COC. Kathy's background is in, architecture and project management. And so, for this specific TA assignment, we are under contract with First Pick through HUD and the Office of Native American Programs. And we've been working with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands for probably close to a year now, I would say, ramping up the Yorktown transitional shelter. And so, I got my start probably 20 or so years ago, overseeing our homeless outreach teams and emergency shelters in Denver, Colorado. That's where I currently am based. I've also done some work in rural communities around Colorado, worked for the governor's office. And now, we've probably worked with anywhere from, 20 to 30 tribes and urban Indian organizations at any given time. We also, work probably in about 12 different states, including with Hawaii and Alaska. So very happy to be here today. I'll turn it over to Zoe for her introduction and then look forward to hearing from you all.
Thank you, Katie. Hi, everyone. Yes, I echo Katie that sometimes these virtual trainings can be challenging, but please feel free to speak up, message us in the chat, even if it's just privately to me or Katie if you don't feel comfortable asking questions to the larger group. So I hail from Duluth, Minnesota, if any of you have heard from it. I've heard of it, excuse me. You will probably hear my dog Ladybug barking at some point in the background. I'm going to try and manage that, but you know what this new world of work is like. And I have also had quite a bit of experience both doing everything from direct service, street outreach with homeless youth, to developing programs and developing permanent supportive housing, transitional housing. Ran a pretty good sized nonprofit in my hometown of Duluth that did a lot of transitional emergency shelter and permanent supportive housing. And then took a job with a national organization and was really tasked to work all over the state of Minnesota and work with communities to provide technical assistance and training to build a pipeline essentially of supportive housing projects across the state. I had a friendship with a woman named Karen Diver, who was subsequently elected chairwoman of the Fond du Lac Band. And I really didn't know much, honestly, about working with tribes or Native communities, but I called her and said, there's this model of housing and there's a lot of money for it. Has anybody ever reached out to the tribes about it? She said, no, of course not. We worked to put together an advisory committee made up of tribal leadership from the state of Minnesota and from all over the state. And they were my mentors, and they trained me and held me accountable and taught me everything I know about working with Native communities. We did 13 supportive housing communities across the state with tribes or Native nonprofits, and then took that nationally. So we've worked everywhere from Alaska to Nia Bay, Washington with the Makah tribe, all the way over across country to St. Regis Mohawk, and really everywhere in between. So a lot of our work has been in the Midwest, I would say in the Northwest, Alaska, and we're really excited. I had been in conversation with the mayor of Honolulu's staff years ago about trying to do a Hawaii-wide, all the islands supportive housing initiative, and then the mayor didn't get reelected. But anyway, so it's really exciting for us to be working with you all. This is like one of the only states we haven't done project in yet. So really happy to be here. And then I'll just, I always like to just kind of share. Well, actually, let's do the rest of you introductions, and then we'll kind of do our setting the table and the framework for today. I'll turn it back over to you, Katie, to see how you want to do this.
Great. Well, maybe I'll just kind of go along the rows that I see. If that works, I'll call on somebody, and then after you introduce yourself, maybe you could pick a square and ask somebody else to introduce themselves. So why don't we start with Sarah? I saw you just came online. Okuda, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Sarah Okuda with the Department of Hawaiian Homeland's Land Development Division in the Design and Construction branch. I don't have anything specific, so I would just like to learn as much as I can about what you have to tell us. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
I think also we have Robert from our division.
Hi, Robert Ng, Project Manager, DHHL Land Development Division for Kauai and Molokai. I have a mix of residential and subsistence agricultural subdivisions in my scope of work here. As you know, our beneficiaries, even though they're not required to have housing on subsistence ag lots, they have that option. So pretty much all of my projects have that the opportunity for housing. So I hope to receive some good information on this.
Wonderful. Thank you, Robert. Anyone else from your division? All
Hi,
right.
I'm Lokahi Paole. I'm also working the Land Development Division. I'm in charge of the scattered lots, which is statewide projects. Same, it's a mix of residential, subsistence ag, and agricultural lots across the state in DHHL's inventory.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. How about Leona?
Aloha. My name is Leona Hosea, and I'm the Certified Housing Counselor for Hawaiian Council here in Kapolei, Hawaii. I work in conjunction with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. I work with kupunas, who are elderly people, 62 years and over, to help with their rental assistance. And yes, thank you for being here. I'm interested to learn more about, there is a homeless crisis here in Hawaii, and need as much information so we can fix the problem here in Hawaii. Mahalo. Oh, and I'd like to introduce Spain.
Hello, everyone. My name is Faye Gami. I am the Associate Director of Community Development, overseeing our loan fund and our HUD team. Just excited to be here and just wanted to ditto what Leona said. Excited to hear what we have to learn in this presentation today. Mahalo for having us.
Wonderful. Thank you. Who would you like?
All right, we can go ahead and introduce Kane next.
Hi, aloha everybody. I am Kane Lindsay. I work alongside with Fane and Leona at the Hawaiian Council. I just recently became a HUD certified housing counselor, so share the same role with Leona. So I am eager to get to just learn more on the housing side, and so I can have more knowledge and tools to help our people here in the role that I'm in. So yeah, excited. Thank you guys.
Thank you. Who would you like to pick next, Kane, to introduce themselves?
I think that's everyone from our team. So I will hand it to Richard with the DHHL team.
Hi, good morning again, everybody. I'm Richard Medeiros. I am the NAHASDA program specialist here at Department of Hawaiian Homelands. Before this, I used to work for Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement, now Hawaiian Council. So I used to work very closely with Leona, Fane, and Kane. So glad to see them over here participating in this training as well. And I will hand this over to Cynthia, who's sitting here in the same room with me.
Aloha, I'm Cynthia Resentes. I am the NAHASDA Government Relations Assistant Manager, NAHASDA Assistant Manager. Part of this is, I guess I'm the culprit when we decided to work within Yorktown to renovate a building that we have to turn it into transitional housing. Richard, by the way, even though he didn't mention it, is the individual who will be running the contractor who will manage the facility for us. And my background includes probably since 2008 being involved in homeless programs within the west side of Oahu. And since 2014, I've been the board president of a service provider who actually manages 2 transitional shelters and about half the island for outreach. And with that, Richard, if you can scroll so I can see if there are other people, and I'll choose somebody. Let me grab Tanya Tehotu. She's not on.
I am. Good morning. Tanya
There
Tehotu,
she is.
Aloha West Oahu. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay.
Yes, we can.
I'm the contractor that is going into contract with the DHHL for Yorktown Transitional Shelter. We currently manage outreach contracts for District 2, 3, and 8, manage an emergency shelter, Onilauena, a transitional shelter for families, which is called Oniamalu. And then we have a master leasing with the city and county for 8 5-bedroom homes. The goal for those homes is to get them into providing supportive services and getting them into one-day home ownership. And let's see. Let me pick Angel.
Aloha, my name is Angel Tuivagu, and I'm a home preservation specialist at Hawaii Community Lending. My current role is to provide leasees with application assistance to understand the complex process and lowering barriers to obtaining resources and funding to remain stably housed. And I look forward to getting a good refresher on the different skills that I can use to help the families that I'm working with. Mahalo. I'll call on Sheena or Anna. Sorry, is Anna still on? Maybe not. Kelbert?
Yeah, good morning, Kelbert Yoshida, project manager with LDD Land Development Division.
Thank you, Kilbert. Who would you like to call on next?
Leona.
We've heard from Leona.
Oh, okay. Robert.
Oh, I already introduced myself. Thank you.
Right. How about, let's see, who have we not heard from? Is it Carlisle? Okay, or maybe, let's see, I'll go to Michelle. Um, okay, let's see. Lindsay?
I think that was me, but I went earlier. This is Kane. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'm
No, you're
sorry.
good.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying to figure out who we haven't heard from yet. Okay, what about, is it Randette? Randy? McEnroe? Okay. All right. Anybody who wants to unmute themselves who hasn't yet introduced themselves, we'd love to hear from you.
Hello, hi. I think this would be an opportunity for me. Hi, I'm Carlisle Hanley, Land Management Division Land Agent for Maui. I'm only on my second month here at DHHL, so I'm just trying to find out as much about the different components and what they do, and maybe some of the mechanisms that they have behind, how they operate. So here to learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlisle. All right, and anybody else who has not had the chance to introduce themselves yet? All right. Okay, well, I'm going to share my screen again, and then Zoe, I know you wanted to talk a little bit just about framing this up, and then we're going to hop into our training. And Zoe, if you're talking, you're on mute.
I was.
Okay. Okay.
I was trying to find them anyway. Yeah, so I just, when we worked to put together a pretty extensive training plan for this project, really based on our experience doing the opening multiple, I'm going to say housing programs and shelters for homeless people over the years. And but with that being said, it's different every single time, and we try and make it specific to your community, as specific as we can get. But you are obviously the local experts. We are not. So as we're talking about things, if you have experiences that either mirror or are different than what we're talking about, or you need to sort of tweak our language or how we're talking about things, please jump in and share. We learn from our clients. That's how we're able to continuously learn and grow and bring new programs and new trainings out to the community, is really from our clients. So some of the trainings that we put together, we talked about that they're going to be really important to do in person for a number of reasons. that's on hold right now because of the shutdown, but at some point we will be with you in space with you doing some of these. Some of those trainings include a pretty deep dive on trauma-informed care. But we did want to touch on it today because we don't know that we're going to have access to all of you at the in-person training. And so trauma being the factor that is universal, not only with people who experience homelessness, but with most of us, right? I heard at one point a statistic that at any given time in any space you're in, statistically 40% of the people are dealing with unresolved, active, current trauma. That's pretty stunning, but not surprising. And that percentage goes up when you're working in communities that have been systematically genocided or with people who have been oppressed. And so I just want to say that we're very much aware of how triggering some of this training can be for people. It often triggers us to talk about trauma because, of course, we have our own experiences. So we want to be really careful and respectful about that and ask that everybody, we want to give you sort of the heads up. We're going to talk about some stuff that is hard, and we're not going to go too deep today because we really want to do that in person. But even so, even though we're going to keep it, somewhat shallow, it still might be triggering. And so we just want to invite everyone to breathe deep and to take care of yourself. If that means you need to step away for a minute, get a cup of tea, get a glass of water, feel some kind of way about something, share something, that this is a safe place for all of you to do that. So just wanted to kind of set the table on that issue, and I will turn it back to Katie to get us going.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, for setting the stage there, Zoe. And again, thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate you being here and your commitment to having this discussion with us and dialoguing and learning, and hopefully we as well, as Zoe said, can learn from you today. So yes, as she mentioned, this will be just, again, kind of high level today. Our next training that we have set. So today we're going to, again, be covering kind of the basics of transitional shelter and low barrier housing. We're going to talk about the approaches with harm reduction, trauma-informed care. And then the next training we have will be focusing more on boundaries and de-escalation techniques, kind of the effective communication, active listening, and some ways to deal with some, challenging or hard to deal with problematic behaviors. And then again, hopefully in person, once we are able to travel, we'll be coming and we will be joined by a woman named Linnell Smith, who runs a consulting company as well, and she is going to offer a training on trauma, but as it relates to finances, financial literacy, and financial trauma. And so we're really excited, again, as Zoe said, to get a little bit deeper into the aspects of trauma and trauma-informed care when we are in person. But we will start today, at least, to kind of give you a good background and talk a little bit about some of the research and some of the things that we have certainly learned over the years as it relates to trauma and the brain. So without further ado, we do a lot of work in permanent supportive housing, and I think one of the goals, certainly, of this transitional shelter program is to move people out, right, of shelter, hopefully as quickly as possible, but when they are ready to transition into something that is more permanent. So, we look at transitional shelter, we look at supportive housing, all is having this low barrier model. And so we're going to talk really kind of about what that means, what low barrier means, and what it means to accept people where they are. And as they come to us, knowing that, they will need some help. Some people may need it a little bit longer than others. Again, depending on, their experiences, depending on their circumstances. But some of the folks, right, that you all are working with or will be working with in this environment, right, include people who are, experiencing homelessness or housing instability. And so that's really who we're going to be talking about today, and talking about those approaches of low barrier approaches to helping folks who find themselves in this circumstance. So again, folks who might be literally homeless, living on the beaches, living in shelters, staying in overcrowded conditions, motel rooms or with family and friends. Maybe people who are coming out of jail or prison, or people who are just living in places that are not meant for human habitation, right? So HUD has a lot of different definitions right now for homelessness. It can also include people who are fleeing from domestic violence situations. And so, we know folks who are either, literally homeless again or at risk of experiencing homelessness, are going to fall into one of these categories who might be a good person or a good fit for the transitional shelter. And so again, we've all of these pictures too, I'll mention, are of folks who have moved into some of the buildings that we have worked with and supported. I'll let Zoe tell a story here about some of the folks who are in this picture here in a minute. But yeah, again, the people that you're working with may certainly experience or have experienced serious chemical dependency, mental health issues. They're the folks who are probably cycling in and out, again, of emergency shelters, of emergency rooms, of hospitals, of detox. They lack stable housing, again, for a variety of reasons. But we do know that really the common piece to all of this is that folks have experienced trauma, right? They've experienced past trauma. They may still currently be in trauma. And a lot of folks have experienced adverse childhood experiences. So childhood trauma along with historical trauma. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that is. So anyway, yeah, I thought, Zoe, if you wanted to mention a little bit about the CSKT crew here, you could.
Yeah, so this is a project that we did with some folks that live at a project we did with the Salish Kootenai, Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. I've been working with them on and off for probably 10 years to put together a supportive housing project. And there was a lot of resistance in the community for a long time. And then when not even the ARPA money, what was the
CARES Act.
CARES Act. Which was that first pot of money that came out during COVID. The tribe was given a chunk of that money, and they decided that it was time to do a supportive housing community. Unfortunately, they decided it 2 months before the money was due to be expanded. And so they got we responded to an RFP. Long story short, the only way we could get something done was to we convinced somebody to sell the tribe their old hotel and renovated it and turned it into a supportive housing community. But the thing I love about this community and this project is the tribal department that stepped up and said, we want this for our folks, was the public defender's office. So they were actually doing care management already with people who were coming out of jail because a lot of them were homeless and had nowhere to go. And so they were sort of scrambling, trying to find them housing. And at the time, I don't even know how this is legal, but there were people stuck in jail who their sentences were up, but they would not release them because they did not have a place to release them to. And it was during the COVID epidemic. So which was just a travesty. So anyway, they were able to house their citizens. And these are 3 of the elders who lived there who were formerly recently incarcerated and actively using substances, probably, because it is a harm reduction model. And folks, sobriety is a lifelong journey for many people. And so these are the scary people that live in this housing. We had to go, this is a little bit of me being snarky, but we had to go out there about a year after it opened because there was some new council members and everyone was rumors were flying, and it was like, you would have thought this was a drug infested, just Hell's Angels, blah, blah, blah. And we went up and talked to council and reminded them what this was. And then they did an open house, and literally it's full of elders. And yes, some of them are using, but they're not scary or dangerous or bad people. In fact, they were lovely hosts. And one of the women had made everybody fresh caramels and was passing them out. And it's just a lovely, lovely community.
Absolutely. Wonderful. All right. So thanks for sharing that, Zoe. So yeah, again, a few of the components, right, that we're going to focus on, meeting people's basic needs, right? We're going to talk a little bit about, harm reduction and the housing first model, really, which is, a model that just meets people where they are first, meets their basic needs, and then once they're housed or have shelter, can really start working on some things that that the client themselves, that the residents want to work on. And then we'll talk a bit about the trauma-informed piece. So, again, just meeting folks where they are, kind of starting at the bottom, right, of the pyramid. Physiological needs, right? It's something that we all have as basic needs, right? Water, food, air, sleep, shelter. Those are just our basic needs. And we know that we can't really move up towards, the top of the pyramid, self-actualization. I know I'm still really striving to get there. So, we can't really move up. Nobody can move up the pyramid unless we have our very basic needs met. And so that's just kind of where, this model of bringing people into shelter, regardless, right? Regardless of if they still have substance use, if they're struggling with mental illness, if they don't have a job, if they don't want to get sober. We just say we're gonna meet people's basic needs, right? And then we're gonna offer them safety. And again, it's really hard to start thinking about how you can treat somebody's trauma if they're not safe, right? If they're living under a bridge, or if they're in a tent, or if they're in an abusive relationship. It's going to be very difficult to work on anybody's needs, right, of what they have, whether it's mental health needs or addiction treatment needs, until they feel safe. So really that blue line and the green line at the bottom, of the pyramid, really talking about the physiological basic needs and the safety needs of people is what we're focusing on. And then certainly as we move up, people want love, they want belonging, they want connection, they want community, esteem and self-actualization. And I think these are all things, especially those first three layers, right? The blue, green, and yellow, are things that this transitional shelter program and the work that you all are doing is going to be able to offer to people. And so, it's that idea of like, we're not going to require a bunch of things. We're not going to place a bunch of conditions on people. We're going to say we are meeting them where they are. We know that people will show up with a variety of needs and a variety of circumstances. And we're going to say, you deserve housing, you deserve to be sheltered. And then we're going to really work with you and try to come up with a more stable housing plan so that when you are ready, you can transition out into something that is a bit more permanent. And please, again, ask questions, chime in. If anybody wants to push back on any of this, let us know. Let us know what your thoughts are about some of these philosophies and approaches. So with harm reduction, harm reduction kind of in a nutshell, what we're really striving to do here is to reduce the adverse health, social, and economic consequences of the use of legal and illegal drugs and substances without necessarily reducing someone's use or consumption, right? So we know that drugs and alcohol are in our modern day society. And it's an approach that says, instead of treating people like they are villains, or instead of treating people like they are, horrible addicts, we don't want to punish people who use drugs or alcohol. We don't want to punish their families or the community, but we really want to make sure that they are safe and not harming themselves. And certainly, if they are harming themselves, taking the approach where we're trying to reduce the harm as much as possible for them and for their family members and for the community.
And I'll just add my perspective. So the way that I often think about harm reduction is it's a realistic approach because none of us have magic wands. I have addicts in my family. I lost 3 of them to overdoses during the COVID epidemic. And if I would have had that magic wand and I could have waved it at them, they wouldn't be addicts anymore. And if I had a magic wand and I could wave it at myself, I wouldn't do some of the things that I do that aren't great for my health. But we just don't have a magic wand. And so it's about being realistic. And it's about, if you look at statistics about, we have a broken treatment system in this country. Most countries have a broken treatment system. And so it doesn't work for most people. Some of the data around sobriety is that people who go only 17% after a year of it. Okay, sorry, let me say that. I always get this mixed up. Only 17% of people who come home from inpatient treatment are sober after 1 year. So if we look at our folks who are using drugs and alcohol and who are addicted, and even if they go to treatment, it's abysmal. Like the statistics are abysmal. And so this is really just about embracing our addicts rather than pushing them away, and being realistic about how hard it is to actually get sober and how hard it is to maintain sobriety forever. So we'd like to think of, relapse as part of recovery. And for some people, they're going to relapse for a really long time, and other people are going to relapse for a short time. And for some people, they're just going to use drugs and alcohol the rest of their lives. And our job is really, or the approach within harm reduction is to help them stay alive by all means necessary.
Great. Thank you, Zoe. And yes, so harm reduction, very kind of simplistic way of thinking about it is, kind of the basic common sense. Here's a kid who gets on a bicycle, puts on a helmet. If that kid falls off the bike, hopefully they don't severely hurt themselves. They might still get hurt, but because they're wearing a helmet, they're going to be less hurt, right? They're going to hopefully not hurt their head. On the right, you've got, clean needles. So again, for drug users who are injecting, we're not going to try to punish them to quit, but if they still are using, we're going to at least say, here's some clean needles. Can you use clean needles to avoid, the transmission of hepatitis C or HIV? So there's lots of different forms of harm reduction. I mean, sunscreen is another example I like to use. I'm a white woman and I go outside and I burn really easily, right? So I'll put sunscreen on to avoid getting skin cancer, right? That's another form of harm reduction. I get into a car, I put on a seatbelt. So if, God forbid, I'm in an accident, and this has happened before. I was in a really bad accident about 5 years ago, and, I was wearing a seatbelt, and so I was injured, but hopefully, I wasn't more injured than perhaps I would have been had I not been wearing that seatbelt. So these are just, again, some examples. This can be hard sometimes for folks, as an approach. So I just want to see, if anybody has thoughts or questions on the use of this type of approach in, say, this transitional shelter setting, and in housing first and in permanent supportive housing. The reduction of harm doesn't necessarily mean abstinence. It may mean reducing somebody's consumption. It might not always, though, mean that. So I just wanted to see if there's anybody who has questions or thoughts about that.
And I do have the chat pulled up, Katie, so I'm keeping an eye on it.
Okay, great.
Anything except for Rende said that her mic isn't, or that their mic isn't working. And I'm sorry if I pronounced that completely incorrectly.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I got my mic working. Okay.
And how is your name pronounced? Did I do it
It's
totally?
Randy.
Randy, okay.
Yes.
Hi, Randy. All right. Did you have a question or comment, Randy, or did you just want to make sure your mic was working?
No, I just have to make sure I fixed my mic. I was sitting here for 10 minutes trying to fiddle with it, so I finally got it going.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. Okay, so again, just a little bit more about harm reduction. As we kind of mentioned, homelessness, mental health, poverty, drug and alcohol use, these are always, these have been a part of our, again, modern day society. They probably will not be eliminated. And therefore it's better to work to minimize the harm than to ignore it altogether or to stigmatize it. And again, it's gonna accept, right? For better, for worse, right? However you may feel about people who have drug and alcohol, substance use disorder, addiction. Again, as Zoe said, it's really hard when, we ourselves have struggled, or we have family members who have struggled, or we've seen friends who have overdosed or passed away from drug use. It's very hard, right, to think about how to accept people who use, and don't, not punish them along the way. So I know it takes a lot of work, especially if this is a personal experience for folks. But again, we're trying to understand that, chemical use is complex, right? It's multifaceted. There are a continuum of behaviors, right, that come along with somebody's use. And so, the thing here that we want to just point out is that it is a spectrum disorder. And, we recognize that, right? So again, substance use disorder is a disorder. We have to treat it as such. And again, abstinence and recovery, are always hopefully part of the harm reduction philosophy. And many people may enter into transitional shelter and enter into permanent supportive housing with the goal of becoming sober and getting into recovery. But we know that it's not the immediate goal, and that it's going to take folks time, right? Everybody's on their own journey, and it's going to take people a lot of time at various paces for them to get to that place. So again, it's not the immediate goal, but it may very well be a goal if that's something that the residents identify that they want to work towards. So again, overall quality of life for the individual and the community, and not just abstinence, are valid criteria for successful interventions and policies. So yeah, I mean, we just want to make sure again, that we're setting people up for success. And so, again, allowing for somebody to come into housing or coming into shelter without setting up a bunch of barriers for them is one of the things that we're trying to put into place to set them up for success.
I just want to make a comment about this picture because it just makes me smile. This is some of the residents at a place in Duluth called New San Marco that intentionally was built to house chronic alcoholics, really is what their focused population is. And it's been open now for close to 20 years. I mean, the community lost their ever-loving minds when we first proposed this. But probably for the first 10 years it was open, I was bringing tribes from all over the country through there to see that you could actually do this, because it was an incredible place. And the woman, the shorter, well, all the ladies look kind of short there, but the woman on the left in the darker blue jacket, that was my dear friend Betty. She's passed, but Betty was kind of a notorious, she would be in and out of sobriety. Like, everyone would take her in when she was sober. She'd go live with somebody in the community because she was beloved, she was hilarious, and then she'd inevitably go off the wagon, and then she became unbearable. So she'd be on the streets, and she got sexually assaulted and physically assaulted so many times. I mean, it was just constant, and it was so hard. And she'd come around to all the different offices, and we'd pay her to wash windows and stuff, but nobody would house her because she was never going to be completely sober. And then this place opened, and she was one of the first people that we got in there, and she lived successfully in that housing. She had friends, she had community, she had joy. She drank, not all the time, way less than when she was on the streets because she wasn't getting assaulted constantly. But she was the life of the party at that place. Even when I say party, I don't mean when they were getting real drunk party. But she just lit up the room and was a beautiful soul. And I was so grateful that we were all, the whole housing community, because it broke our hearts that we kicked her out constantly because we had rules and high barriers. We didn't know any better at the time. So it was a beautiful thing to see her thrive in that community. Even though she'd never quit drinking, I think she was drinking on the day she died. But she drank much less, and she was a vibrant part of the weave of the community in Duluth.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Zoe. Awesome. And here another group of residents, I think, from that same project singing karaoke. It looks like. So having a good time. Yeah, so again, this approach calls for, the non-judgmental, non-coercive, right, provision of supportive services. We know that, services need to be voluntary. Again, forced treatment does not work for many folks, if anybody. And, knowing that this is the best way to get somebody, right, if they are working towards getting into treatment, is by voluntarily offering them options and walking alongside them. So harm reduction really includes the client in all decisions about the services that are offered to them, including their own treatment plan and their own engagement plan and services. So harm reduction recognizes that the self-healing quality of individuals, and it seeks to empower them to share and support each other in strategies to reduce harm. And again, this might be going out on, on hikes. It might be going out onto a fishing boat, knowing that folks can't go fishing, for example, if they're intoxicated. This is a great way where communities can say, we want you to enjoy this. We want you to come out. We want you to be a part of the community, and you have to be safe, right? So one of the things that you won't be able to do is be intoxicated if you're on a fishing boat, right? So that's also another way, a strategy, to allow for folks to be able to participate in what they want to do. We see this in a lot of tribal communities as well. Folks who want to get involved in art or drum making or being parts of drum circles. And, for tribal members who will say this is medicine, this is sacred, and it can't be a place where people are not in the right state of mind to be able to partake in this. That also gives people oftentimes an incentive, right, to stay sober or to put the drugs away at least for 24 hours or a couple of days so that they can actually take part in a lot of these cultural services and events that are really important to them. So again, I think there's this opportunity too for us in community and for people's community to come together to support them. And knowing that, again, everybody's on their own journey, but there can be ways to certainly, share and support with one another in these strategies to reduce the harm that folks are causing. And again, harm reduction recognizes social inequalities, co-occurring conditions and other barriers that impact individual vulnerability to substance use disorders and their capacity to change behavior. Love this shirt, right? This guy who, sports this around and, says, I'm no longer a danger to society, right? We do want to make sure, though, that, we're never minimizing that there is real harm, right? Especially with people who are using illegal drugs that are very, very serious, right? So meth, fentanyl, crack, cocaine. These are not only drugs that do serious damage to people's brain, causing behaviors that may very well be aggressive. There's also, we know, a very high risk of people overdosing on things like fentanyl. And so we don't want to minimize the real harm and the danger that's associated with drug and alcohol use. So knowing that, acknowledging it, and just knowing that there are approaches that we want to take where we're really trying to keep people safe and, to those earlier point, keep people alive. And so some of the ways, right, of doing that in this work, motivational interviewing, and this is probably very well something that the KWO group will do or has been trained on. I'd love to hear from you all if you care to share around any of these approaches that you use, whether it's motivational interviewing or strengths-based programming, right? So we don't want to remind people of their challenges or of things that they're not good at. We want to tap into the things that people are good at, and really capitalize on those things. And Tanya, I see your hand is up. So would you like to comment, or did you have a question?
No. So since 2017, our homeless programs office, they actually have all these requirements in their RFP contracts. Even down to the trauma care informed, you got to get certified. But as for KWO, we use the motivational interview approach and harm reduction. Mm-hmm. It's a challenge. For our programs, we have community kitchens and community showers and community laundry rooms. We have the capacity to hold about 300 individuals, and to have a harm reduction approach and keep the clients that focus is the challenge. Mm-hmm. They can come back intoxicated as long as their behaviors don't pose imminent harm to themselves or others. Mm-hmm. They can come back high as long as, once again, imminent harm or threat to others. And then we try to, utilizing the motivational interview and just the assertive communication, try to break down their barriers from there. But in most cases, at the point of it becoming imminent harm to themselves or others is where we actually get them to engage. Because for our programs, you can get terminations like 30 to 40 to 50 times, and it's a harm reduction approach. So yeah, I do know it works for most cases, but in some cases, like we have a guy that's been with our organization for a long time. And it's because he will act aggressively, but not to the point where it's a harm to himself or others. Does not drink. And he's like, he's been with us for like a couple years. And for me, if we went through the long haul for all these years, I would want to make it worth it, you know? And the staff is like so overwhelmed with his approach. I don't know if you guys had experienced something like that. But he finally got a housing referral. So I'm hoping that it works out. But yeah, I mean, it has its challenges, the harm reduction approach and the housing focus, but it takes a lot. I'm not gonna, and it takes a lot. For me, I would say it would be easy, but to get the line workers to implement what we're being paid for, which is assertive communication, is a real challenge.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I so appreciate that. I love everything you said, and I appreciate you not sugarcoating it, right? Because it's not easy. And especially like as you said, if everybody has their own everybody has their own like desires, right, to help this individual. And I know, when I did direct service, and I know it's like when you go out of your way or you start to feel like you're working harder than the person that you're working with, or you have done so many things with them and they're making so much progress, right? They might take 2 steps forward and then a week later they're taking 5 steps back, and you're so frustrated, right? With how is this happening? And they were doing so good, or, the aggression piece, I know can be very hard on people. It's very hard not to feel fearful or threatened or just burned out, right? When people are constantly being aggressive or yelling or saying things that are really destructive to people. So I appreciate you saying like, it's not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. I think when we talk a lot about the trauma pieces, I think that's a lot of the time where we've seen people, frontline staff, who have said like, okay, I didn't totally get it, right, until I started to understand what was happening in this person's brain, and what was happening because of their trauma and because of their trauma response. And but it's so hard to get to that point of being able to say like, this is not personal, right? I'm trying to show empathy, but I'm also trying to hold somebody accountable. How do you do that at the same time, right? And also want them to be safe, want them to stay alive, and also make sure that you and your staff are also staying safe. So I do really appreciate everything you're saying. I know it's very hard.
It's very rewarding, but because when I go to restaurants, or I see, when I was doing direct services, I see the children of the households that I was case managing, and their managers, their cooks, they manage Walmart. So it is very rewarding to know that the efforts that I put forward, that it works.
Yes.
But I think one of my challenges is, how do I get the staff to view it the same way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even with all the training and the refreshers, you just get certain stuff like it, and maybe it's because they haven't experienced trauma or experienced a family member that is in recovery and saw the family member struggle.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm starting to notice. That's why. So yeah.
I think the other thing is, and I don't know if we're going to touch on this today or maybe that's for later, but a lot of people get into this work because they have had trauma or, well, everyone has trauma, but it's just varying degrees. And if they haven't really healed from that trauma or done the work around it, and I don't mean that in a judgmental way, I mean it in like, if you are not aware that you have had real trauma and that it is affecting you, and so you haven't done the work around with therapy and whatever else you need to, you're going to get triggered constantly doing this work by residents' behavior. I mean, you're going to get affected even if you have healed from your trauma, let's be honest, but especially if you haven't. And so a lot of times what we see is when we go in and do this training, I can guarantee it's almost universal that the people that are most resistant to this kind of training are the people who have the most untreated trauma as staff. And so one thing too, and I don't know that we talk about this with this particular module, but one thing we can, for sure, I think, talk to you all about is vicarious trauma and the impacts and the effects that has, and how you can help staff identify and create safety plans for when things happen, and really starting to build this awareness even with staff that they probably have trauma that they haven't had an opportunity to heal from. Let's put it like that. So that's another thing that we're starting to see more and more and more of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think it is so important. And for, like you said, trying to figure out what that piece is, Tanya, that your staff need and what they will respond to. And like, yeah, you may have people who have experienced high levels of trauma, and then, like you said, some who have not experienced that, maybe their age, or just they haven't been in the field long enough, or they haven't had family or friends who have been exposed to drugs or alcohol. And so you're working with a wide spectrum, right, of folks. But I mean, Zoe's totally right. We have a colleague, his name is Hassan Latif. He started an organization called Second Chance Center, which is now like the preeminent reentry organization in the state of Colorado. But he and his other two co-founders, collectively had about 75 years of incarceration between the three of them. And when he was in prison, he wrote a book when he finally started doing his own work, as he says. And he wrote this book that is called, the 7 steps of it's called Never Going Back, the 7 steps of never going back and staying out of prison. And the first thing that he says, and this is what he will say, he finally was a wake up call to him, was that you have to own your own shit. And so without, that he had said he would never be able to do the work that he did, one, to get out of prison, and then two, to come out and start a reentry program that is now 12 years old and highly successful. He would never been able to do any of that until he started taking responsibility for what he did, holding himself accountable, and really owning his own shit. And so, excuse my French, but that is one of the things that we remember, and I remember, that it's very hard for people if they haven't worked through their own stuff, their own trauma, to show up and try to work with other people who are in trauma. It's like it's the layering, right? The stacks of trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. That's going to make it much harder for somebody to do their job, do it well, and stay consistent, right, in the way that they show up to work and approach the work with folks.
Thank you.
No, thank you so much. And we're going to talk now a bit more about that piece, just the trauma and the trauma-informed care. And again, like, we'd be happy as well to talk offline, Tanya, if there's anything else, like you said, I mean, the motivational interviewing is great to have people trained in that. We also will do some work around boundaries. We do some work that even incorporates like the 4 agreements, if anybody's familiar with that book. Don Miguel Ruiz. And, again, it's like these things seem very simple, but they're very hard to actually implement on a day-to-day basis, right? And two of the things I think that are most relevant from those 4 agreements in this kind of work, the first one being, be impeccable with your word, right? So that we have to be really sure about what we say when our yes should mean yes, our no should mean no. And then the second one that's really important is don't take things personally. And that's one of the hardest things, at least for me personally, to do for Zoe, right? For all of us. It's like at the end of the day, when we make this about ourselves and not about the people we're working with, first of all, right, that's where we have to step back and say, like, are we really in this for the right reason? Are we really letting our clients choose their own paths using self-determination? Are we really here to be an advocate and to walk alongside them? And when they blow up or they're aggressive or they say something that is really mean, it's not about me, right? It's about them being hurt. It's about hurt people trying to hurt other people. And, it's just trying to show up every single day and say, not to take things personally, not to take things personally. I'm doing my best. I'm doing what I can. And again, there's so much that we don't understand about what is happening to this person and what they're going through, but it's clearly coming out, and it's coming out on me right now. But at the end of the day, if I can remember it's not about me and to not take it personally, I think people will be able to last a much longer time doing this kind of work.
Yeah, that's a really hard one. And honestly, if you can't master, that's a terrible word. I hate that word, master. If you can't get there with not taking it personally, it probably isn't the job for frontline staff, because they're going to get called things a lot. And we would never want to punish somebody for having an outburst like that. And it's really because their trauma has been triggered in some way, shape, or form. But it's not easy, and it's not for everybody. And so I think for frontline staff in particular, for anybody who's working with human beings, really, somehow internalizing that piece. And it's really, really hard. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of work, but it's really critical.
Yeah, so we're going to get into it now. Again, we're going to try to keep this somewhat high level, knowing that we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive on trauma and trauma-informed care when we see you in person. But we do just want to kind of talk a little bit, we'll nerd out, I guess, a little bit here on some of the research and sort of what we know about trauma, and what occurs, right, to our brains and our bodies when it is experienced. So just kind of simply put, right, I say, if you can remember the 3 E's of trauma, this is a really good way to think about the definition. So individual trauma results from an event or a series of events or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual that is physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So that's a mouthful. But again, this is a definition from SAMHSA. And it really, I think, helps to ground our understanding in what it is. Again, this could be a single event, somebody dies, you have a car accident, or it could be a series of events, right, where there's repeated sexual abuse from a father to a child in a child's home. So, again, it can be a one-time thing. It can be things that happen over and over again. It can be, events as in historical trauma and generational trauma that have happened for generations. And again, it's how it's experienced by the individual. We'll talk a little bit too about how the same thing that happens to one person may very well be experienced totally different, right, by another person. And so the effect piece is really how the trauma plays into and affects your long-term well-being, right? Your long-term health, mental health, social, emotional, spiritual well-being. So again, it's more than just, we're going to say, when we think about trauma, and why a trauma-informed approach is going to be so critical. It's about more than just offering shelter, right? We know that. It's about building an environment that's going to be safe and that's going to be built on trust and empowerment. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about as we go through this next section. So there was a study called the ACEs study, and why childhood trauma matters. So many of you have probably heard of ACEs. If not, that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And basically, I want to say this was now probably about 20 years ago. There was a study that was done by Kaiser Permanente and the CDC. And they surveyed about 17,000 adults in California. And what they found was that there was a very clear link between childhood trauma and a person's long-term physical and mental health problems. So, what I will say is it's a very interesting study. It's not all inclusive in the sense that I feel like it is not the most culturally relevant. So for you all, maybe your beneficiaries, for tribal communities, I would say it misses the mark on a lot of things like historical and generational trauma, right? So but basically what the ACEs quiz is, it's a list of 10 questions, and it just asks you basically a yes or no, or it asks you to indicate that this thing happened frequently or very often in your home before the age of 18. And it's things like, you had a parent who was an alcoholic, your parents were divorced, you had a parent or family member who was incarcerated, you experienced verbal or emotional abuse, you experienced sexual abuse. So it's these kinds of questions, right? And the more that you answer yes to that these things happened, you have a point, and the more points you have, the higher your ACEs score is. So I'm going to say it doesn't ask questions like, was a parent in a boarding school, or did your family experience being moved off or pushed off of land, or being taken away as a child, taken out of your family, or being forced into a different family. So it doesn't, I would say, get at the more indigenous parts of kind of these scales of trauma. So I just wanted to kind of say that it's not all inclusive, but I will say it kind of gave a good starting point to start assessing people's childhood traumas. And then later in life, they found that people were more at risk of certain health impacts the higher their ACEs score was. So we're talking about things like people who had 4 or more ACEs. So they, again, answered yes to 4 or more of those questions. And you might have a 4 as a score. You might have an ACE score that's a 10. But anybody who had 4 or more ACEs was 2 times more likely to have heart disease, 4 times more likely to have depression, 12 times more likely to risk suicide and have a suicide attempt. And there was definitely increased risk for substance use, cancer, diabetes, and other health problems. So, again, these were the findings. 67% had at least 1 ACE in their score. 1 in 8 people had 4 or more ACEs. And then again, what it found was that childhood trauma causes toxic stress that literally alters the brain development, hormones, and immune function. And what we also want to say is that ACEs are not a total destiny, right? It's not like we have this really depressing slide that I don't think is in here, but it kind of shows how the brain is, right, very elastic when your brain is younger, right? Your ability to change increases dramatically the younger you are, right? Your ability to change and for your brain to change, the older you are, becomes much more difficult, right? And so, it's hard when you're, midlife and thinking, oh my gosh, right? I'm never going to change from this. I think what the point here is that addressing childhood trauma as early as we possibly can is going to be much more helpful in the long run as people do age and get older. So, what helps again is obviously support that is going to encourage and allow for healing. And that's safe and stable housing and shelter, nurturing relationships, early screening for trauma, being trauma informed, offering community supports and mental health services, and creating policies and procedures and systems that respond with empathy and not punishment. So all that again is just a high level of what happened with this study. And really kind of then what came out of this was, okay, that the need for a trauma-informed approach is not optional. It's essential for our health. So I don't know if anybody had any thoughts on that. Or wanted to mention anything else about the ACEs. If anybody's familiar with the ACEs test. Okay, I will move on. And again, this just kind of gets more into the, you know, Alaska Native, Hawaiian Native, American Indian populations are much more impacted in all of these areas, whether it's substance use disorder, mental illness, or both, than the general population. And so this just gives you a few of those statistics that show how many people aged 18 and older, right, from the general population to the indigenous population, have experienced these things and really how it shows up as a public health issue, right? So all these things, knowing that there are connections, right? That there are impacts, long-term health impacts, and that this really is a public health issue. Okay, so a little bit about the brain. And I guess we just, we like to do this part of the training because I think the more at least I have understood in learning about this stuff over the years, it makes more sense, I guess, to me as to like if I can figure out like, oh, this is why this person is acting this way, or this is why this behavior is showing up this way. It makes more sense to me now because I can actually see and visualize what is happening in somebody's brain, right, when they are responding to trauma. So basically, yeah, we're just going to talk high level. We're going to talk a little bit about the prefrontal cortex, and we're going to talk a little bit about the amygdala. And so, our prefrontal cortex, right, is the part that is responsible for our executive functioning. It's responsible for our decision making, our problem solving. It's kind of the thing that makes sure that we're all okay and walking through life okay. I kind of think about it as the watchtower, if you will, right? So looking out and about, it gives you a big perspective on what's going on in life, if you're safe, and if things are okay. We've got this little almond-shaped part of the brain called the amygdala, and that's kind of more in the center. And this is really what I think of as the brain's alarm system, right? It's the smoke detector. So when the smoke detector goes off in your kitchen, right, you are alerted to the fact that, oh my gosh, there might be a fire in the kitchen, right? So it's that the amygdala, the alarm system, is sensing that there's danger. And it triggers the sympathetic nervous system, which then prepares your body for fight or flight, right? So again, it's like this is when you go into survival mode. You go into, your little lizard brain, right? Reptilian brain is what we call it. So you're stepping out of your, everything's okay with your prefrontal cortex. You're stepping out of that and you're realizing something is not okay. I am not safe. I either need to run, flight. I'm going to be prepared to fight. I'm going to freeze, or I'm going to, fawn. We're going to talk a little bit more about these trauma responses, but those are kind of the big ones. And so you'll know, right? We've all experienced this. You start breathing more quickly, you start sweating, your heart rate increases, and your body is getting ready to act. So that is what the amygdala does. And it's really interesting, right? Because in this next slide, you can really kind of see like literally the person's brain looks like it is on fire when they are in this amygdala response. So it's just, again, it's when you have experienced somebody who's experiencing trauma, that you can't rationalize with them, right? You can't try to have a rational conversation, because the amygdala it's impaired. It's in hyperactive mode. I'm scared. I can't think of anything else right now other than being safe. My anxiety's off the charts. My fear is really high, and I can't manage anything. I can't manage any stress right now. The only thing I can manage is figuring out how to stay safe or stay alive. So I think this is helpful, because when I started learning about this, I was like, okay, somebody's they're not being bad. They're not they're not a bad person. Their character is not bad just because they're behaving this way, right? It really is like not seeing trauma as a personal failure or somebody just showing up and being a jerk. It really is seeing it as a physiological response um, to something that is traumatic that is now affecting every single part of a person's brain, body, well-being, and that includes like the words that are going to come out of their mouth, right? The decisions that they might make in that moment are not going to be um, very smart. I should just say they wouldn't be the same as somebody whose amygdala hasn't been triggered. So that's just a little bit about the brain. And I just want to see if anybody has any examples of how they've seen somebody in that sort of survival mode, or if you want to share any of your own stories or any questions that you might have about that piece around the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala.
Yeah, hi, Katie. I just wanted to chime in here. My father is he was in the ministry, and he had successfully, I guess, quote unquote, cured people of certain physiological ailments that was all due to agreements and things like unforgiveness and
Mm,
trauma, and sometimes it's self-induced. And I'll just give a real quick example. And this is really important because, this is outside of our normal scope of work, but, just to understand, what's keeping our beneficiaries from succeeding in life and getting to a point where they can financially qualify even, the way they conduct themselves and how they spend their spending habits and
mhm,
their undisciplined life. So just a real quick example. So he had this gentleman who was on disability because he had a bad back, and this is pretty common amongst our beneficiaries, right, or that economic class, blue collar worker, let's just say. And
okay.
so he, the guy was complaining about how he couldn't move and he couldn't even get out to go shopping and all that because his bad back. And my my father just brought to his attention. He says, you got a lot of benefits from this, don't you? And the
Mm,
guy acknowledged it. And he says, it's kind of hard to let go of all of this because you're receiving so much benefit. You're getting disability. You don't have to go to work. You can have all
mm,
kinds of excuses to not do something, make the wife do everything for you because you've got a bad back and all that.
mm,
And once he acknowledged this,
mm,
the pain in his back instantly disappeared. It was an
mm,
amazing thing.
mhm, mm,
And so what you're talking about is so important because it's
mhm.
something that 99% of us never even think about, and how our lives are
Yeah.
affected, our professional lives, our economic, our social lives, all
Mhm,
because of agreements that we make in our
mm,
minds,
mm.
maybe emotional trauma that can be cured by,
Yeah.
forgiving people and all of that. And it's just amazing. I can't say enough about it. But what you're talking about here is just so critical to the success of our program, even.
Mm,
And
mm,
previous administrations have acknowledged that, yeah, we have a social problem in the Hawaiian community. We have a cultural and social problem that
mm,
never gets addressed.
mm.
And that is why the majority of our beneficiaries, quite, can't qualify to get a home because, it's affecting how they perceive things and, their conduct in their spending habits and just their inner relationships, their family relationships, the dynamics are all chaotic because of all this trauma that's never addressed.
Yeah.
And so, but thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to throw that in.
Thank you, Robert, so much. You're gonna love this. Well, yeah, love might be a strong word, but you're gonna really like this financial trauma training that Linnell offers. She's gonna get at a lot of those things that you were just talking about. And I love that you bring up that example too. I've heard that before. I haven't read this book, but there's a man by the name of John Sarno, and he writes this book about the mind body, right? And it's basically about healing your back. So like the premise of it is that your back pain in so many people's experiences comes from rage, right, and anger that has not been addressed and trauma. And so I love that you bring that up. There's also a really great book that is called The Body Keeps the Score. And it's also all about, right, like things happen to you as a child, they might happen to you as an adult. You might want to forget about them, right? We might all say, like, yeah, we just get into our patterns. We start, taking advantage of these benefits that we have offered to us, or we compartmentalize and we put that away on a shelf. That happened 30 years ago. I'm not going to think about it. Your body, right? That pain in your back does not go away. And your body will always remind you. The body will always keep the score. until you are ready to do something about it. So I hear what you're saying. Thank you so much. I can really resonate with what you just said. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. And Katie, did you, I had to step away for a minute to not yell at my dog, but gently redirect her. But she was eating the couch. But anyway, so did you talk about childhood trauma at all? Trauma before you did. Okay, great. I mean, I heard you talk about it.
Well,
but
just
like,
the ACEs, but no, go ahead, Zoe.
Oh, okay.
I don't think I did talk about what you were going to bring up.
Okay, yeah. I just always want to mention it because so there's a big difference between what happens to what happens to your brain when you experience trauma at an age where you can process it and understand what's happening, right? So even like, let's say as a 12-year-old or as an adult, somebody hits you, you have a way of processing what that was. You have a recourse, hopefully, for it. You have a way to be safe from it, hopefully, not maybe as a 12-year-old always, but you understand what's happening, right? What the scary thing is, and to Katie's point about the body keeping the score, is what happens to, say, a child before you can remember, right? So a baby who gets, beat by one of their parents and maybe up to a certain age, and then the abusive parent goes away for whatever reason, and nobody ever talks about it, and this person grows up and doesn't have a memory in their brain about what happened, but their body remembers what happens. And so they might they might be walking down the street one day and literally see somebody turn a corner, and that person, for whatever reason, is the size, the shape, whatever, their body has a reaction to that person because it reminds them of the person that hurt them. And so they might have a panic attack and have absolutely no reason why they are having a panic attack. And so you might have residents, it's unlikely, but you might have residents, or for yourself or your staff, who are like, I don't know why this is happening to me. I did my work around my abusive partner. I don't understand. And that's the part that can be pretty scary to think about. There is recovery from that as well. But so I just want people to be aware of that, because sometimes it's like, why did I just react that way? And you have no idea, but your body has kept the score. So something happened when you were little that you don't necessarily remember that is having a reaction. And I've experienced that and been able to trace what the root cause is, but it was terrifying the first time it happened because I had no clue. I didn't believe I had anything like that happened in my life, but it turns out I did. So it's just something to be aware of.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Zoe, for sharing that. So what is this? What we'll talk a little bit about next is, what does this look like, right? Again, people have very different fear responses. I'm sure you all have experienced something that has made you react in a certain way. Maybe you're a fighter, maybe you are one who flees, maybe you're a freezer, a fawner or fainter, right? And the same thing again, the same incident or the same event could happen, and people could respond entirely differently to that event. So I hate to use this example, but let's just say there is a shooting. You're in a mall, right? And somebody shoots the gun. So you hear gunshots. Now, one person might run into the sound, right? They might run into where they heard the gunshots. They might run towards it to try to fight, to try to defend, to try to do whatever they want to do. They hear a gunshot, they respond to it by going into it. Another person might literally turn and run away because they are so scared that is the only thing that they know how to do. They're going to run from there to be safe. That's the way that they are going to survive. Another person might literally freeze and shut down and just be in a completely frozen state. So you don't know, right, what's going to happen. I mean, you might be able to know. Some people, are like, oh, I'm a total fawner, or I know that I'm going to be a fighter just because that's how I was raised, or this is my response. But just understand that your trauma responses might look different, and the people that you work with They'll look different and they might all respond to the same event very differently. So, the fight response, just some things to kind of think about recognizing. So obviously all of these things, all of these responses are going to be activated when the brain perceives a danger. And in this case, with a fight response, they perceive that they need to defend or protect. This can come out as anger, aggression, defiance, and the person might feel cornered even if there's actually no threat that is present. So some examples: verbal aggression, physical aggression, and controlling behavior. Maybe somebody who is in that fight response. So the flight response, again, is somebody who is trying to survive through escape. That is triggered when the brain thinks that running away is the safest, best possible option. This, though, can show up in somebody as avoidance, right, as restlessness, or even as hyperactivity. And sometimes individuals will struggle with staying present in conversations or situations because they're constantly in their brain thinking, this isn't safe, I need to plan my escape route. So some examples of the flight response would be somebody who leaves abruptly, right? You might be trying to have a conversation with somebody and they're just out. They just are leaving altogether. Or they might be pacing or fidgeting, or they might have really rapid speech or even speech that you can't really understand. And then they might be avoiding you, right? So, hey, so can we get together and work on that plan that we talked about? Oh, yeah, I'll come and see you later. I'll come and see you tomorrow. I'll come and see you next week. And just kind of really pushing that down the road because they feel like, again, avoidance, being away, running away is going to keep them safe. So then our freeze response, this occurs typically when the brain feels that it's trapped and it can't run, away or fight. So this can manifest as like literal numbness, disassociation, or emotional shutdown. The person might struggle to think clearly or respond to questions. And so you might see this, or you might be able to recognize this showing up when people are struggling to speak. They might be zoning out, staring at you blankly, or feeling paralyzed. The fawn response is an interesting one, and one I feel like we don't hear about as often, right? When we think about the 3 Fs, but fawning is an interesting one, right? Because this is sort of the people pleaser. And this is also a trauma response. So it happens when the brain is triggered because it feels like survival is dependent on pleasing other people to avoid harm, right? So this can manifest as excessive compliance, saying I'm sorry, apologizing all the time, having a lack of boundaries, right? And really prioritizing other people's needs over their own. So if I just make this person happy, if I just say yes to my abuser, maybe he won't hit me again, or maybe he won't hit me as hard. And so again, it's really the over apologizing, it's agreeing to everything and avoiding conflict at all costs, and really having a hard time setting boundaries. And oftentimes saying yes, even though that person wants to say no. They feel like yes is the easier path out. And then freeze is the final one. I'm sorry, we'd already talked about freeze. Faint is the final one, and that is literally when your body just completely shuts down and passes out. Like your body cannot take this trauma any longer. So again, just understanding trauma in the brain, how this really wears a groove, right? In the brain. So your neural pathways, a person's neural pathways are literally going to be impacted the more that trauma occurs. So especially when we're dealing with chronic trauma and somebody who has experienced a lot of trauma, either the same trauma over and over again or a lot of different types of trauma, the brain begins to adapt for survival, right? So when somebody who hasn't experienced a lot of trauma shows up in fight or flight, and it might be just like kind of a one-time thing, but somebody who has experienced chronic amounts of trauma will actually start to live in that survival mode, and this can be really, really unhealthy for a person's body. So it means that they're constantly hypervigilant. It means that over time, these responses of fight or flight, freeze or flee, they become hardwired, right? So again, just if you look at this dirt path, it's like each time the brain reacts this way, it deepens the groove, right? And it makes the brain's go-to response be one of those trauma responses. And it's not because the person wants to react this way, but it's because your neural pathways and your nervous system has learned that this is the safest way. This is the safest route to go. So again, just kind of be aware of that if you see these things showing up in people. You might see people being quick to anger. You might see them being very distrustful of others. You might see them, again, avoiding authority or engagement, and then having really a lot of hard time regulating their emotions, even if there's not a threat there, right? So you're not scared. Nobody around you is scared, but this person that you're working with is just constantly releasing the stress hormone and making them basically live a life that is on edge and hypervigilant at all times. And that is when you can really start to recognize that somebody has been extremely traumatized for very long periods of time and that their body has adjusted to being in survival mode. So again, just knowing and understanding the impacts of trauma. So there's going to be the physical impact, right, that we talked about on the body. Think about those long-term, long-lasting adverse health effects. Emotionally, trauma can bring intense anxiety and depression, emotional numbness to people. Cognitively, it can cloud our thinking, right? If you think about brain fog, it disrupts our focus and our memory. Behaviorally, people may turn to really risky coping mechanisms, right? So abusing drugs, gambling, self-harm, any of these things that they can do to manage the overwhelming emotions that they have. And again, relationally, trauma can damage trust. It can damage relationships with people. And it affects the whole person. So it's just, I think, important for us to think about that as well, that it really does, from the physical to the emotional to the mental, affects the whole person. So some things you've probably seen, common signs of trauma that maybe you have recognized in people. Again, anger, irritability, fatigue, feelings of helplessness, social withdrawal, alcohol and drug abuse. And again, I think, we mentioned earlier that big behaviors are not caused by bad character. Like oftentimes we say big behaviors, not bad behaviors. But it's really caused by what happened to the person in the past. And so if we can kind of move away from why are you doing this? Why do you keep sabotaging your housing? Why do you keep using all these drugs that you know are hurting you? Why do you keep doing all these things? Really kind of thinking through more of that trauma-informed lens of well, I really want to understand what happened to this person in the past, right? What is their story? What happened to them as a child? What have they experienced that is really causing them to react this way? And then I think this slide is helpful because, sometimes we as we try to be as less judgmental, non-judgmental as possible, I think it's sometimes natural, right? It's just sort of innate. It's a human bias, right? We do kind of show up as judgmental. And so sometimes we'll start labeling people or thinking about people, right, as what you see on the left-hand side of this slide, right? They're being manipulative, they're being lazy, they're being disrespectful, they're attention seeking, right? But if we can dig a little bit deeper, maybe, and think about, well, maybe that's maybe a misconception, right, of what's really happening to this person because they've experienced trauma. And so what we might think of as manipulative is really just somebody getting their needs met in a way that, in ways that have worked in the past, right? And doing anything that is necessary to survive. If we're saying, oh, that person's so unmotivated, why can't they just get out of bed? Why can't they just meet with their job counselor? Why can't they just do these things? I mean, maybe they are just really depressed and fearful or overwhelmed. Like we've had women who have come into housing after leaving abusive relationships and literally have just slept in their room for a month. And staff are very worried. Why is this person not coming out? They're not even eating. And to hear from these survivors who have said, I am so tired, and their body, right, has just been having to try to survive for years, is just needing that time to recover.
Yeah, Katie, I hear the word manipulative a lot used by staff people, and I don't think they're using it to be jerks. I think they're using it because that is our go-to reaction when somebody acts in a way that appears manipulative. What I hear is like, oh, they they hear no from one staff, so then they go to another staff to try and get a yes, and they're so manipulative. And it is 100% a survival skill. So the more manipulative a resident is, that probably means the more they've had to work, the harder they've had to work to survive, and they've had to learn all kinds of tools and tricks to try and just stay alive. And then the lazy is the other one I hear, and I don't think it's used derogatorily all the time, but I do hear it a lot, especially when we're working with people who, like maintenance staff, who don't have the social service context, but they are in people's apartments and they are seeing the housekeeping that isn't happening, or the kids that aren't being really taken care of very well, or, this is the third time I've had to fix this toilet because they just keep flushing whatever down the toilet because they can't carry it to the goddamn garbage can, these lazy whatever. And that's why we do a lot of this training for maintenance people, honestly, because they see the worst of it and they don't have any of this context. So I think those are the two that I hear the most, and those are the two that I think are probably just so common across the board with the folks that we are working with.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think it's just, again, it's like, how can we try to reframe? How can we try to just be aware? We'll talk a lot more about this when we do the effective communication and active listening training. But I think it is like, if we can try to present the best part of ourselves in that non-judgmental manner, and if we can try to look deeper and just hold an awareness that trauma is happening, we're realizing the widespread impact of trauma, it's here. And then can we try to perceive a little bit of a deeper experience of what's going on for the other person? And so we'll definitely get more into that, but this is just sort of a high level again of the things that you might see or witness or be able to start learning from because of how people are reacting and responding from and due to their trauma. So just want to spend the last couple of minutes here talking a bit about healing and the trauma-informed care approach. I think all of you, or many of you probably are very familiar with this and have already done it or are doing it in your work. But, supportive housing, again, transitional shelter, using a trauma-informed approach basically is where we're working to, understand and respond to trauma in an appropriate manner. And so we talked about the 3 E's earlier of trauma. Now we're going to talk about the 4 R's of trauma-informed care. So if you can remember these 4 R's, again, just knowing and realizing the widespread impact trauma is everywhere. It's universal. It affects all of us. And then recognizing the signs, symptoms of trauma in clients. So a lot of things that we just talked about with the trauma responses, fight, flight, freeze, etc. Then we're going to respond by fully integrating the knowledge about trauma into our policies, into our procedures, and our practices, and how we show up every day working with clients. And then how we are actively seeking to resist re-traumatizing someone. That one is hard because sometimes it's happening unintentionally. We don't even know that we're re-traumatizing a person. But the more, again, that we can recognize it, the better off we're going to be in trying to avoid re-traumatization. And again, I think we'll get more into this at a later time in our trauma-informed care training, but these are just kind of from SAMHSA, again, the core principles of trauma-informed care. So making sure that the person feels safe, and this includes the shelter itself, right? It includes any type of supportive housing or shelter, the physical environment. We want to make sure feels as safe and non-institutionalized as possible. So anything that you can do as you're opening up Yorktown and kind of thinking about the lighting that's used, the paint colors that are being used, do we have clear lines of sight? Do we have sharp corners? So that's really going to start with both the physical space as well as then our approach in making people feel safe, trustworthiness and transparency, collaboration, mutuality, peer support. Anytime we can bring in peers, folks who can walk alongside people because they have lived experience. We want to bring in empowerment, voice and choice, again, are critical. We have to follow, right? We have to follow the client. And we have to make sure that we are restoring any autonomy that perhaps has been taken away or has been lost in the past. It's about self-determination, right? It's about people taking control about, over their decisions. And then certainly the cultural, the historical, and the gender identity issues, you all knowing your culture, your history best, and taking care to be respectful around those pieces of people's identity and their own lived experiences. So some challenges, and how to do trauma-informed care in some challenging moments. I'll just say, being trauma-informed, when residents are struggling to meet expectations, or like you talked about earlier, Tanya, when they're really struggling with the harm reduction approach, it can be very challenging. It can be very challenging for your staff. It can be challenging to not shift into this like top-down authoritarian approach of like, you need to do this, I'm setting these ground rules, it's hard, right? It's very hard in those situations, I think, to be as trauma-informed as possible. And that's where we have to be really cognizant of where we are, right, ourselves. So again, we're going to try to avoid those authoritarian approaches, risks of control, right? Would we think that by putting more control over or into the situation, that's going to help? This can actually trigger trauma responses at a much more alarming and faster rate. And again, it's using curiosity if we can, and not judgment. It's collaborating instead of controlling. It's coming together with somebody and saying, hey, I am in this with you, and how can we work together to try to figure this out, or to solve a problem? And you're building trust and accountability by framing expectations as healing and supporting your clients through their challenges. So again, just a couple of quick kind of tips, I guess, for staying grounded, especially when you enter into this work. The more you can do this as professionals, the more you can model these behaviors to the folks that you're working with, and hopefully teach these grounding behaviors as well. So again, kind of the deep breathing, the mindfulness, right? A lot of times when we are working with clients and they either kind of go down the past rabbit hole of all these terrible things that have happened to me, or they're in crisis mode and you're trying to reassure them that everything's going to be okay in the future. Like, we can't make promises, right, that we can't keep, and we just really want to focus on the present moment, and what's happening in the immediacy of right now, right here with this person, and trying to stay as grounded and mindful as possible. Some things you can do to stay grounded: engage your senses, right? Like feeling your feet on the ground, holding physical objects, going outside for a walk and identifying, 5 things that are blue, 4 things that are green, 3 things that are red, right? Doing breathing exercises on your fingers. I mean, all these things kind of maybe feel a little cheesy, but they can be very helpful, especially in a moment where you're feeling yourself tense up and you're trying to stay grounded. Positive visualization, doing some movement. It always helps to stand up, move around. Light exercise, checking in with yourself, right? So regularly assessing your emotional and physical state. And are you okay to go in and try to work with somebody else who's in a highly traumatic, triggered state? And then, yeah, staying connected to your colleagues, friends, reaching out for support. And again, these are kind of the basics. Again, these are more for kind of your frontline workers of trying to stick to a routine, obviously getting, good sleep, hydration, nutrition, and then, seeking support from mental health professionals as needed. And this is for you all. This is for staff. And so I want to end that by just talking a little bit about how, crucial it is to think about self-care. And if anybody wants to kind of share any examples of what they might do for themselves, for you all to take care of yourselves. So this kind of work and working with people who have experienced high levels of trauma is really, really hard. And so just knowing that self-care is really very important. And again, we will talk more in depth about vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, burnout, at a later date. But just, kind of just the basics of, making sure that, you find the social supports that you can, that you have consultation, if you need to, or spiritual renewal, however, you need to kind of get through your own experiences with dealing with trauma, and certainly the work that you do. Just intentionally and frequently creating opportunities for your own respite, your own replenishment, and engage in activities that offer some distraction or personal growth. So that's kind of, what we have for the slides. I just did want to see if anybody wanted to share either their own thoughts on how they can best take care of themselves, your thoughts on self-care, your thoughts on any of the stuff that we talked about with regards to trauma and trauma-informed care. So I know we have maybe just about 10 minutes left, and we'll share these slides with Richard and Cynthia to be able to pass along to you. We've got some of the books that we mentioned, the videos that we talked about. These are each very quick 15-minute TED Talks. When we talked about the childhood trauma, how childhood trauma affects health across a lifetime. Also one that is called Everything You Think You Know About Addiction is Wrong. Yeah, and so I just want to see, so if you had other things to say, or if there's any chatter in the chat box, or anybody who wants to come off mute and ask questions or have a little discussion.
No chatter in the chat box.
Okay.
I can always talk, Katie, but I'm going to be quiet and see if anyone else will talk.
All right, well, I will stop sharing the slides so we can see one another. Let's see if anybody would like to comment in the last little bit of time we have here. I see Cynthia is laughing. Cynthia and Richard over there laughing. I love making 3D cakes and party decorations. That's awesome, Tanya. How do you make a 3D cake? I'm so curious.
With my hands. Oh, and fondant and Rice Krispies.
Ooh.
It gets me refocused.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that. You're gonna have to take a picture of one and send it to us.
Yeah. I love doing backdrops. Something different from work, but I just love it. That's my hobby and what I like to do.
I love it. That sounds great. A great way of being able to take care of your stuff. Take care of yourself when the stuff gets really hard.
I went to a homeless conference in the mainland.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat in a breakout for trauma. And one thing that they pointed out is that as soon as they become homeless, that's where their trauma journey starts. So I find it very interesting, the stats that you guys have on the slide. Thank you guys.
Absolutely. Thanks for all of your questions and comments and contributing to this conversation and the work that you do.
Thank you for sharing all the information.
Absolutely, Calvert. Thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts?
Everyone's quiet, so they must be under some sort of trauma for public speaking in these.
Right, Richard.
And Lehua has just joined us from her other meeting.
Hello, Lehua.
Sorry I missed it, but I know I can watch it recorded, so thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, hope you're doing well. No, it was great.
Actually,
Please go ahead.
I was asking Richard to request the slides because there's a lot of good information on there that note taking, you can't note take that fast, but I think there was a lot of good information, not just for what we're doing with Yorktown, but especially for some of our other providers that are on the call. I think that this will help them in their working with all of our beneficiaries. Even the ones that we're not going to have in the facility itself, but even on a normal, regular basis of communication, like our housing counselors, that help them work through their financial literacy problems, if you will. So I think the future sessions, especially on that, for our other providers is going to be extremely important. So I did appreciate that insight today. So I think there are going to be a number of people looking forward to those additional pieces of information that we can tap into.
For sure. Absolutely.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Well, I think since nobody's in the chat and nobody's talking, I think that wraps us for today. Thank you, Zoe and Katie, so much for all that information. I know it's a lot for us to digest, and we look forward to the next one. For everybody on here, the next one is going to be December 3rd. I'll be sending out information about that as we get closer to that date. But yeah, this is just part one of a series of trainings that we're going to be doing. And we'll be sending out more information as we get closer to that date. But I appreciate everybody for taking the time today to come and participate in this. And I look forward to continuing doing these trainings with everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everybody.
Mahalo,
Interesting
have a
talk.
good day.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you all.